The afternoon sun pressed down on the village market like a hot iron, turning the red earth into fire beneath Joseph's worn sandals. He stood there, clutching a small hand-woven basket he'd spent 3 nights making. His fingers still bore the marks, while his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape what was about to happen. Around him, the market pulsed with life. Women balanced trays of tomatoes on their heads. Children chased chickens between stalls, and the air smelled of roasted corn and that particular dust that rises only in African villages where dreams are planted deep but rarely watered. He'd come to find Mirabelle, beautiful Mirabelle, whose laughter could make the whole compound forget their troubles, whose walk turned heads from the church gate to the stream. She stood near Mama Adana's fabric stall, surrounded by her friends. Those girls who always seemed to know the latest gossip before it even happened, who dressed in clothes that whispered money, who looked at boys like Joseph the way you'd look at furniture that had outlived its use. Joseph's hands trembled as he approached. Inside the basket were mangoes, 3 perfect ones he'd climbed the tallest tree to pick, the kind with flesh so sweet it tasted like sunshine. He'd also tucked in a folded note, words he'd practiced 100 times. Mirabelle, my heart has chosen you since we were children. I know I have little now, but I'm working. I'm building. Will you let me prove that love doesn't need wealth to be real? You know that moment when the whole world seems to hold its breath? When even the wind stops moving and the birds pause their songs? That's what happened when Joseph reached Mirabelle's circle. The market didn't actually go silent. That only happens in movies. But something shifted. Eyes turned. Conversations dropped to whispers. Mirabelle, Joseph said, his voice steadier than he felt. He extended the basket toward her like an offering at an altar. She looked at it, then at him. Then her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was sharper than that, colder. Her friends giggled, hands flying to cover their mouths in that way that makes laughter feel like weapons. Joseph, Mirabelle said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. She didn't take the basket. What exactly do you think this is? His throat tightened. I made this for you. I wanted to. You wanted to what? She cut him off, her voice rising like she was performing for an audience. And maybe she was. You think mangoes in a basket will make me forget that you wear the same 3 shirts every week? That your sandals are held together with wire? That you live in that compound where the roof leaks when it rains? Someone laughed. Then another. Soon it spread like fire in harmattan season. Joseph's face burned hotter than the sun above. Mirabelle, I know I don't have much right now, but what, Joseph? But you have dreams. She actually laughed then, and it was the kind of laugh that stays in your chest long after the sound fades. Dreams don't pay school fees. Dreams don't buy land. Dreams don't make a woman proud to walk beside a man. She stepped closer, and her next words came quieter, more deadly. You can never be enough for someone like me. Do you understand? Never. The basket slipped from Joseph's fingers. Mangoes rolled across the red earth, perfect and golden and utterly ignored. Around them, the market had become a theater. Mama Adana shook her head sadly. The other girls whispered behind their hands. Even the men by the pepper stall, men who knew what it meant to be poor, to be dismissed, looked away because watching another man's heart break in public feels too much like looking in a mirror. Joseph stood there, rooted like a tree that had just been struck by lightning. His eyes met Mirabelle's one last time, searching for even a flicker of the girl he'd known since childhood, the one who used to share her lunch with him when his mother couldn't afford to pack one. But all he saw was cold certainty. She'd made her choice. He was poor, and in her world, poverty was contagious, something to be mocked away before it touched you. He turned and walked, not ran. Walking was all the dignity he had left. Behind him, the laughter followed like drums announcing his shame. By evening, the story would reach every compound. By tomorrow, the whole village would know. Joseph the dreamer had been rejected. Joseph the poor boy had been put in his place. Joseph the foolish one thought he could reach above his station. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't see as he walked past the church, past the school, past the mango tree where he'd picked those perfect fruits. Something inside Joseph didn't break that day. It transformed. That public humiliation, that cruel laughter, those words, "You can never be enough," they didn't destroy him. They became fuel. Dangerous, slow-burning fuel. That night, lying on his mat in the small room he shared with his younger brother, Joseph didn't cry. He stared at the ceiling where moonlight leaked through cracks, and he made a decision that separates the forgotten from the unforgettable. He would leave. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Soon. And when he returned, if he returned, the village would remember his name for reasons Mirabelle couldn't yet imagine. His mother always said, when shame plants a seed in a strong man's heart, sometimes what grows isn't bitterness. Sometimes it's greatness. Joseph was about to test that wisdom. If this already grips your heart, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. It means more than you know. 3 days after the market incident, Joseph's mother knew. Mothers always know when their children are about to do something that will change the shape of their lives forever. She watched him moving through the compound differently, quieter, more purposeful, like a man gathering pieces of himself that had been scattered. He stopped going to the evening gatherings where young men argued about football and politics. He stopped taking the path that led past Mirabelle's house. He was already gone, even though his body remained. It was Mama Eliza, his mother, who found him that Thursday night, packing his few belongings into a worn traveling bag that had once belonged to his late father. The kerosene lamp flickered shadows across the small room, making everything look like it was already a memory. He'd folded his 3 shirts with unusual care, his 1 pair of decent trousers, the Bible his grandmother had given him, a notebook filled with ideas, dreams, scratches of plans that probably made no sense to anyone but him. "So you're leaving?" she said. Not a question, a statement soft as evening prayer. Joseph's hands stilled on the bag. "Mama, I don't apologize for having the courage to walk away from people who can't see your value." She entered the room fully, her wrapper rustling in that familiar way that had comforted him through childhood fevers and nightmares. She sat on the edge of his mat, and the lamplight caught the gray that had crept into her hair, gray that he knew came partly from raising children alone after his father's death, partly from worrying about how they'd eat tomorrow. "I heard what happened at the market," she continued. "The whole village heard. You know how gossip travels here. Faster than news, slower than truth." She reached for his hand, and her palm was rough from years of washing clothes for other people's families, from farming land that barely yielded enough. "That girl, Mirabelle, she showed you who she is. Believe her." Joseph finally looked at his mother, and his eyes carried that particular shine that comes right before tears decide whether to fall or retreat. "Mama, I thought if I worked hard enough here, if I proved myself." "My son." She squeezed his hand. "Some people measure a man by what's in his pocket. Others measure him by what's in his chest." She tapped his heart gently. "You've been measured by the wrong scale your whole life. This village, these people, they love you when you're useful, when you're small enough not to challenge their own failures. But you were never meant to stay small." The compound outside was settling into night sounds. Crickets beginning their chorus, a baby crying 2 houses over, someone's radio playing high-life music that drifted on the warm air. Soon this would all be behind him. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "Where will you go?" his mother asked. "The city. Lagos." The word felt too big in his mouth, like swallowing something he hadn't chewed properly. "I have a cousin there. Uncle Festus's son, remember? He said there's construction work. It's hard, but it pays. I can start there, Mama. I can start building something." Mama Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and went to the corner where she kept a small tin, the kind that once held milk powder, but now held something more valuable, her savings. Joseph had seen that tin his whole life, watched her drop coins into it after selling vegetables, after finishing a washing job, after every small victory against poverty. He'd never seen her open it. She opened it now. "Mama, no." Joseph started to protest, but she held up one hand. "Listen to me and don't argue. A mother's blessing isn't just words, it's preparation." She counted out bills, worn, folded notes that represented months of her sacrifice, and pressed them into his palm. It wasn't much. Maybe enough for transport and 2 weeks of food if he was careful. But it was everything she had. "This village will tell you that you ran away in shame," she said, her voice taking on the kind of strength that comes from women who've survived what should have broken them. "Let them talk. Let them think what they want. You're not running from anything, Joseph. You're running towards something. There's a difference, and years from now, they'll learn it." Joseph's throat closed completely. He pulled his mother into an embrace that tried to say everything his voice couldn't. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you. I'm scared. I'll make you proud. I promise, I promise, I promise. When you get there, she whispered against his shoulder. Remember this. Poverty is not a curse, it's a season. And seasons change. But you must never let this world make you cruel. Success that turns you into the people who hurt you isn't success at all. It's just revenge wearing expensive clothes. They stayed like that while the lamp burned lower, while the compound grew quieter, while somewhere across the village Mirabelle probably slept peacefully, unaware that she'd just set in motion something that would eventually return to her doorstep. Joseph left before dawn, when the world was still that soft blue that comes right before sunrise. His younger brother, Chitty, walked with him to the edge of the village, the point where the red dirt road met the main highway. Neither of them spoke much. What was there to say? They both knew this might be years before they saw each other again. Maybe longer. Don't forget us when you become a big man, Chitty finally said, trying to smile, but not quite managing it. Never. Joseph gripped his brother's shoulder. I'm doing this for us. For Mama. For everyone who's been told they're not enough. A bus was coming. You could see its headlights cutting through the morning mist like promises. Joseph picked up his bag, that worn thing that held everything he owned, everything he was. As he climbed aboard and found a seat by the window, he looked back one last time. The village was waking up, smoke rising from cooking fires, roosters announcing the day, the same rhythms that had marked every morning of his life. But Joseph wasn't part of that rhythm anymore. He pressed his hand against the window as the bus pulled away, and in his mind, he whispered the promise that would haunt and drive him for years to come. One day, they will know my name. Not because I want them to bow, but because I refuse to stay forgotten. The village shrank behind him. Mirabelle's laughter, the market's mockery, the shame, all of it became smaller, more distant. What grew larger was the road ahead, winding and uncertain and absolutely terrifying. But Joseph had learned something crucial in those 3 days after his heart broke. Sometimes the only way to prove you're enough is to walk away from people who keep telling you you're not. His mother's blessing sat in his pocket alongside her money. The bus rattled toward Lagos, toward concrete and chaos and opportunities that would test every part of him. Joseph didn't know it yet, but he was about to discover what happens when humiliation meets determination, when poverty meets purpose, when a boy the village dismissed starts building himself into a man they'd never forget. The journey had begun, and mercy on anyone who thought this was just another story of a poor boy leaving home. Lagos swallowed Joseph whole. That first week felt like drowning in noise. Car horns, street hawkers, generators roaring. Millions of voices all shouting at once like the city itself was arguing with God. His cousin's room in Ajigunle was smaller than the one he'd shared with his brother, but here he paid rent by sleeping on the floor and waking at 4 every morning to join the construction crews that built the city's dreams while living in its shadows. The work broke him down to nothing first, mixing cement until his shoulders screamed, carrying blocks up scaffolding that swayed in the wind. His hands, which had been soft enough to weave baskets, became rough as tree bark. His back learned new languages of pain. Every night he collapsed onto that hard floor, and every morning he rose again because his mother's voice lived in his bones. Poverty is just a season, but seasons in Lagos moved differently than in the village. Slower, meaner. 6 months in, Joseph was still just another laborer. The other men called him JJC, Johnny Just Come, because he still said please and thank you like he was in church. They laughed when he saved half his pay instead of spending it on beer and women. This one thinks he's going somewhere, they'd say, not knowing that their mockery sounded exactly like Mirabelle's, and that every laugh just made him work harder. Then came the day that changed everything, though he didn't recognize it at first. Divine moments rarely announced themselves with trumpets. The site manager, a pot-bellied man called Oga Emeka, who usually treated workers like furniture, was arguing with a Chinese contractor about building specifications. The Chinese man spoke broken English. Oga Emeka spoke angry pidgin, and neither understood the other. The project was stalling. Money was being lost. Tempers were rising in that dangerous way that happens when pride and profit collide. Joseph was supposed to be carrying blocks, but he'd been watching, listening, and something in his mind, that part that had always loved numbers and patterns, suddenly clicked. He saw the problem. The Chinese contractor wanted measurements and metrics. Oga Emeka only understood feet and inches. It wasn't about the building at all. It was about translation. Oga, sorry sir. Joseph interrupted, his heart pounding because workers who spoke uninvited usually got fired. I think I understand what he's trying to say. Both men turned to him like he'd just grown a second head. What happened next surprised even Joseph. The notebook he'd brought from the village, the one filled with his scratched ideas, also contained conversion tables he'd taught himself from an old mathematics textbook. He'd been studying at night by candlelight, not because he thought it would matter, but because his mind refused to stay idle even when his body was exhausted. He translated, not just words, but concepts. He drew diagrams in the red dust with a stick. He showed both men how their visions were actually the same, just measured differently. 20 minutes later, the argument was over. The Chinese contractor smiled, actually smiled, and shook Joseph's hand. Oga Emeka stared at him like seeing a ghost. You, Oga Emeka said slowly. What's your name again? Joseph, sir. Joseph, come to my office after work. The other laborers exchanged glances. Office meetings usually meant trouble or termination. Joseph finished his shift with his stomach in knots, convinced he'd somehow overstepped, that his cleverness had just cost him the only job he had. But when he entered Oga Emeka's office, really just a container with a desk and a fan that barely worked, the man was looking at him differently. That Chinese man, Mr. Chun, he's the investor for 3 buildings we're constructing. He wants you as his site translator and assistant. Oga Emeka leaned back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. Pay is triple what you make now. But Joseph, I'm going to tell you something, and you better listen. Opportunities like this don't come to people like us. When they do, you grab them with both hands, and you don't let go until they transform you. You understand. Joseph understood. Oh, how he understood. Working with Mr. Chen opened doors Joseph hadn't known existed. The Chinese businessman was tough, demanded perfection, worked 16-hour days, expected the same from everyone around him. But he was also fair in a way that shocked Joseph. He didn't care that Joseph came from nothing. He cared only about results, about loyalty, about that hunger to build something that lasted. In China, Mr. Chen told him one evening as they reviewed blueprints, "We have saying, a tree that stands above the forest will face the strongest wind. You understand? You want to rise above? You must be ready for storm." Joseph was ready, more than ready. While other young men his age were chasing fast money and faster women, Joseph was learning everything. Construction management, basic accounting, how to read people's intentions behind their words, how to negotiate, when to speak, and when to observe. Mr. Chun became something between a mentor and a mirror, showing Joseph not just what he could become, but what he needed to sacrifice to get there. 2 years passed, then 3. Joseph moved from translator to assistant project manager to junior contractor. His salary grew, but more importantly, his network did. He met engineers, architects, government officials, businessmen who moved money the way other people moved furniture. He learned their language, their rules, their secrets. But Lagos also taught him darker lessons. He watched men sell their integrity for contracts, saw friends betray friends for promotions, learned that success had a price, and that price often came wrapped in compromise. There were nights when he was offered bribes, when he could have cut corners, when doing the wrong thing would have made him richer faster. His mother's words haunted him then. Success that turns you into the people who hurt you isn't success at all. So Joseph built differently. Slower, perhaps, but cleaner. His reputation became his currency. The young man who delivered what he promised, who didn't cheat his workers, who somehow managed to balance ambition with integrity in a city that usually demanded you choose one or the other. By year 5, Joseph wasn't working for Mr. Chen anymore. He was partnering with him. They'd formed a company, Chun and Associates, though everyone knew Joseph was the associates doing most of the groundwork. They built shopping complexes, residential estates, government projects that reshaped neighborhoods. Joseph's name started appearing in newspapers, on project signs, in conversations among people who moved power around like chess pieces. The boy who'd left the village with broken sandals now wore Italian shoes. The one who'd carried blocks now supervised crews of hundreds. The one Mirabelle said could never be enough was becoming someone whose phone calls ministers answered. But here's what kept Joseph grounded. Every month, without fail, he sent money home. Not just to his mother, though she got the most, but to his brother's school fees, to neighbors who'd shown kindness when his family had nothing, to the church that had fed him when hunger had been his constant companion. He remembered where he came from, because forgetting felt like betraying the very pain that built him. 7 years after leaving, Joseph stood on the rooftop of a building he'd just completed, 22 floors of glass and steel that caught the Lego sunset like a promise. His phone rang. It was his mother. "Joseph, my son, when are you coming home? The village asks about you." He looked out at the city that had broken and rebuilt him, at the skyline he'd helped shape, at the life he'd built from nothing but humiliation and hunger. "Soon, Mama," he said quietly. Very soon. What he didn't tell her was that when he returned, he wouldn't be coming back as the boy who ran away. He'd be returning as the man who'd turned their mockery into a monument. And sometimes, the sweetest victory isn't revenge. It's simply showing up as proof that their judgment was wrong. The news reached the village 3 days before Joseph did. A convoy was coming. Black SUVs. Important people. Something about a new development project that would bring jobs, infrastructure, maybe even a hospital. The kind of news that made the village chief call emergency meetings and women start cleaning their compounds like the president himself was arriving. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was who was behind it all. Mama Eliza knew, of course. She'd known for weeks, ever since Joseph called to say, "Mama, I'm coming home. Not to visit, to build." She'd kept the secret like a mother guards her child's heart, watching the village buzz with speculation, watching people who'd mocked her son suddenly speak about progress and opportunity like they'd always believed in such things. Mirabelle heard the rumors too. She was still in the village, beautiful as ever, but beauty had done for her exactly what Joseph's poverty had done for him, defined her in ways that eventually became a cage. She'd turned down 3 marriage proposals waiting for someone wealthy enough to match her standards. She'd watched younger girls get married, have children, build lives. She'd watched herself become the cautionary tale mothers whispered about. "See, Mirabelle? Too proud, now look." But pride is a stubborn thing. Even as her friends settled and her options narrowed, she told herself she'd made the right choice that day in the market. Joseph had been poor. She'd been practical. That was all. The convoy arrived on a Saturday morning when the sun was still gentle and the village was just waking up. 4 black SUVs rolled down the main road, engines purring like promises. Children ran alongside them, shouting. Adults emerged from their compounds, shading their eyes against the sun. By the time the vehicles reached the village square, it seemed like every soul within 5 miles had gathered to see. The chief was there, dressed in his best traditional attire, flanked by elders who'd practiced their welcoming speeches. The youth leader had even organized a small cultural dance troupe, teenage girls in matching ankara, ready to perform for whoever these important visitors were. When the first SUV door opened, a tall man stepped out. Tailored suit, designer sunglasses, the kind of presence that makes silence ripple through a crowd. It took a full 5 seconds for recognition to hit. Some saw it immediately. Others needed to squint, to compare this polished stranger with the memory of a poor boy who'd left 7 years ago in broken sandals. "Joseph?" someone whispered. "That's Joseph?" another voice said, louder this time. "Ah, not Joseph that." The murmurs spread like water finding cracks in a wall. Joseph removed his sunglasses slowly, and his eyes swept across the crowd with the kind of calm that comes from a man who no longer needs to prove anything. He'd already proved it. Now he was simply presenting the evidence. "My people," he said, his voice carrying across the square with the quiet authority of someone used to being heard. "I've come home." What followed was a blur of greetings, of handshakes, of people suddenly remembering they'd always known Joseph would make something of himself, that they'd always believed in him, that they were proud, so proud, of how far he'd come. The chief gave a speech about the village's beloved son returning. The elders nodded like they'd predicted this exact outcome. Joseph watched it all with a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He knew what this was. Human nature, naked and predictable. The same people who'd laughed at his humiliation were now jostling to stand near him, to be seen with him, to claim some connection to his success. But he'd come for something specific. Someone specific. His eyes found her in the crowd. Mirabelle stood near the back, partially hidden by Mama Adana's fabric stall, the same stall where she'd stood 7 years ago when she destroyed him with words. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something else. Recognition of what she'd lost? Or just the practical calculation of what she might still gain? Joseph didn't approach her. Not yet. He turned to the chief instead. Your Highness, elders, people of this village, I've returned to give back to the community that raised me. My company will be building a vocational training center here. We'll also renovate the primary school, install a borehole system for clean water, and establish a cooperative that will provide loans to small businesses. This village gave me my foundation. Now I want to strengthen its foundation for the next generation. The announcement triggered an eruption of applause, of cheers, of that particular joy that comes when blessing arrives unexpectedly. But Joseph held up one hand, and the crowd quieted instantly. That's what power does. It doesn't demand silence. It receives it. But I want to say something else, Joseph continued, his voice dropping to something more personal, more raw. 7 years ago, I left this village broken. I left because someone I loved told me I would never be enough. That my poverty made me worthless. That my dreams were jokes. He paused, let the words settle. Many of you laughed that day. Some of you still remember it. Some of you probably wish you could forget it. The silence now was different. Uncomfortable. Guilty. Joseph's eyes found Mirabelle again. She'd moved slightly forward, and her face had gone pale. Around her, people were starting to connect the dots, remembering that market day, that public humiliation, those words she'd thrown at him like stones. I could have come back for revenge, Joseph said quietly. I could have come back to prove to one person that she was wrong about me. But you know what I learned in Lagos? That building yourself up to make someone else feel small isn't success. It's just pain in expensive clothes. He walked toward Mirabelle then, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Every eye was on them. Every ear strained to hear what would happen next. This was the moment the village had been waiting for without knowing it. The confrontation, the vindication, the sweet justice of karma arriving in a tailored suit. Joseph stopped a few feet from Mirabelle. Up close, he could see how the years had marked her too. The confidence that had been cruelty was now uncertainty. The pride that had been her weapon was now her prison. Mirabelle, he said, his voice gentle in a way that surprised even himself. You were right about one thing. I wasn't enough, not for you. But I've learned that being not enough for the wrong person is actually a blessing, because it forced me to become more than enough for myself. Mirabelle's eyes filled with tears, not the kind that manipulate, but the kind that comes when truth cuts through years of self-deception. Joseph, you don't need to apologize, he interrupted. You showed me who I couldn't be. Thank you for that. Because if you'd said yes that day, I might have stayed comfortable. I might never have discovered what I was capable of becoming. He turned back to the crowd then, his voice rising to address everyone. This village taught me everything, both what to become and what not to become. You taught me that people's judgment says more about them than about you. That poverty is temporary, but character is permanent. That the ones who laugh loudest when you fall are often terrified of what you'll become when you rise. The village chief stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion that might have been genuine or might have been political. Joseph, my son, we are honored. We are humbled. We, Your Highness, Joseph said respectfully but firmly, I'm not here for honor. I'm here because my mother still lives in that compound with the leaking roof. I'm here because children still walk 5 miles for clean water. I'm here because talent is wasting away in this village simply because opportunity never arrives. If I can be that opportunity for even one person the way Mr. Chun was for me, then maybe my pain had purpose. That evening, after the official ceremonies ended, after the speeches and the dancing and the promises, Joseph walked to his mother's compound. The same red earth path. The same mango tree where he'd picked fruit for a girl who'd thrown them back in his face, metaphorically and literally. Mama Eliza was sitting outside, waiting for him the way she'd waited 7 years ago on the night he'd packed his bag. When she saw him, she didn't say anything. She just opened her arms, and Joseph, successful Joseph, powerful Joseph, the Joseph whose name now commanded respect across 3 states, collapsed into his mother's embrace like a child. You made me proud, she whispered. Not because you became successful, because you became successful without becoming cruel. Later that night, as Joseph lay on a proper bed in a proper room he'd built for his mother, no more leaking roofs, no more scrimping, no more shame. He thought about Mirabelle. about the market, about humiliation and transformation. He felt no anger anymore, no bitterness, just a strange gratitude for the pain that had pushed him beyond who he thought he could be. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Joseph, this is Mirabelle. I know I have no right, but I needed to say I'm sorry. Not because you're successful now, but because I was cruel when it didn't cost me anything to be kind. You deserve better. You always did. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back. We all make choices, Mirabelle. Mine was to let your rejection drive me forward. Yours was to make me believe I needed to prove something. We were both wrong, but we both learned. I forgive you. More importantly, I hope you've forgiven yourself. He didn't wait for a response. He set the phone down and looked out the window at the village. His village, sleeping under the same stars that had watched him leave in shame and return in strength. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The training center, the school renovations, the borehole project, the dreams that would lift this place the way pain had once lifted him. Because that's what separated Joseph from the people who'd mocked him. They'd wanted him to fail so they could feel better about their own limitations. He wanted them to succeed so no one else would have to feel the way he'd felt. The village had bowed when he arrived, not because he demanded it, but because transformation has a way of commanding respect that pride never could. But Joseph wasn't interested in staying above them. He was interested in lifting them up beside him. That's how legends are born, not in revenge, but in redemption that reaches backward to pull others forward. The entire village bowed. But Joseph? He'd already learned to bow too, to humility, to purpose, to the mother whose blessing had carried him through every storm. And that made all the difference. This story teaches us that rejection isn't the end. It's often the beginning disguised as an ending. When people judge your worth by what you lack rather than who you are, remember, their measurement is wrong, not you. Joseph could have returned with bitterness, could have made Mirabelle feel the pain she once gave him. But real strength isn't proven by crushing those who once crushed you. It's proven by rising so high that revenge becomes irrelevant, replaced by purpose. Your humiliation can become your fuel, your pain can become your platform, but only if you let it transform you rather than trap you. Success isn't about making people bow. It's about becoming someone who lifts others up even after they've pushed you down. If this story touched your soul, do this for me. Hit that like button, drop a comment sharing what resonated with you, and subscribe so you never miss these true African stories that remind us of our strength, our resilience, and our capacity to turn pain into power. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who's been mocked, dismissed, or told they'll never be enough. Let them know, the village that laughs today might bow tomorrow. But more importantly, let them know they don't need the village's approval to become everything they were meant to be. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. It's still being written. Make it legendary.